Tokyo's urban agglomeration holds roughly 38 million people, the largest metro area on Earth. But here is the strange part. Its core density is lower than Manhattan, lower than Paris, and nearly half of all dwellings in the region are detached houses. Visitors who fly in expecting a Blade Runner forest of glass towers find something else entirely. Two-story wooden homes, pocket shrines wedged between buildings, corner tofu shops a few minutes walk from ultra-efficient train stations. The world's biggest city often feels like a quiet suburb, but that is not a failure of planning. It is the result of a system that does the exact opposite of every other major Asian megacity, and somehow works better than all of them. The medieval maze that refused to die. To understand how Tokyo became the opposite of everywhere else, you have to go back to before it was Tokyo at all. The city began as Edo, a loose, tangled sprawl of samurai estates, temple grounds, merchant quarters, and narrow canals spreading outward from the shogun's castle. There was no master grid, no grand boulevard system, no geometric order imposed from above. Neighborhoods grew organically around feudal estates and shrine precincts. Streets bent and curved to follow old irrigation ditches, property fences, and footpaths worn into the mud over centuries. When Edo officially became Tokyo in 1868 and modernization began, the government added railways, government ministries, and Western-style buildings, but it never erased the fine-grained medieval fabric underneath. The old street patterns survived, the tiny blocks persisted. The village-scale neighborhoods kept their shape. Then came the moment that should have changed everything. In March 1945, American B-29 bombers dropped incendiary clusters across the eastern wards of Tokyo. The firebombing of a single night, March 9th into the 10th, killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed 16 square miles of the city. More people died and more was destroyed than in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Wooden neighborhoods that had stood for generations were incinerated in hours. By morning, entire districts were nothing but ash and foundation stones. Over 1 million people lost their homes. Tokyo had a blank canvas, the perfect opportunity to impose wide boulevards, modernist superblocks, and rational planning grids, exactly as cities like Rotterdam and Le Havre did after their own wartime destruction. Ambitious reconstruction plans were drawn up. Engineers designed new road networks and use-separated districts. But the plans were never realized. Japan was devastated, financially broken, and desperately short of housing. The government could not afford to buy out millions of small landholders. Complex land ownership records, many of them surviving the fires in local registries, meant property lines stayed where they had always been. So Tokyo was rebuilt parcel by parcel, family by family, along the same medieval lot lines. One historian describes the result as a city that designs itself through millions of micro-decisions rather than a single master plan. The medieval maze survived the firebombing, not because anyone chose to preserve it, but because no one could afford to replace it. That organic rebuilding explains the texture of Tokyo, but it does not explain how 38 million people actually moved through a city built on winding alleys and tiny blocks. The answer is not highways, it is a business model that does not exist anywhere else on Earth. The train companies that were secretly real estate empires. While most Asian megacities doubled down on highways, flyovers, and car-oriented infrastructure, Tokyo hitched its growth to private railway companies. And those companies were not really in the train business at all. They were in the real estate business. Here is how it worked. A firm like Tokyu Corporation would buy cheap farmland along a proposed rail route on the outskirts of the city. Rice paddies and woodland that were nearly worthless because no one could easily commute from there. Then they would build the rail line out to the farmland. Then they would develop housing estates, shopping complexes, schools, and entertainment centers around every single station along the route. The trains existed to make the land valuable. The profits from land sales financed the trains. And the trains brought residents who spent money at the station front businesses, which made the surrounding land even more valuable. It was a self-reinforcing loop, and it scaled beautifully across dozens of private operators, all competing with each other for riders and homebuyers. The Futako Tamagawa redevelopment is a perfect example. Over 11 hectares of offices, retail space, housing, and public parks, all purpose-built around a single station to feed riders into the Tokyu line. This was not a government transit subsidy program. It was a private business generating profit by embedding public transportation into daily life at a depth no subsidy has ever matched. The numbers tell the rest of the story. In a 6-city comparison of Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, Mumbai, Delhi, and Tokyo, Tokyo has the highest rail length per 1,000 residents, roughly 0.336 kilometers, which is 20 to 30 times that of Mumbai or Delhi. Commuting in Tokyo is dominated by high-capacity rail. Buses and private cars play a fraction of the role they play in peer cities. The city built on medieval alleys moves 38 million people because private companies figured out that selling train tickets was really just a way to sell houses. But the rail network explains how people move. There is another system underneath it, one that controls where people live, work, and shop, and it breaks every rule you have ever heard about how cities are supposed to be organized. The zoning code that flips everything upside down. Most countries zone cities by exclusion. Residential here, commercial there, industrial somewhere else. Single-family zones ban apartments. Commercial zones ban homes. Residential zones ban shops. Each land uses gets locked into its own rigid district, separated by roads and buffers, connected only by cars. American cities perfected this model. Most Asian megacities imported a version of it. Japan did the opposite. Japan uses just 13 national land use categories, and they cascade. Each higher intensity zone automatically includes everything allowed in the zones below it. Housing is permitted in nearly all of them. There is effectively no single-family-only zone anywhere in the entire country. Even the most restrictive residential category still permits apartments, small shops, clinics, and schools. A quiet residential street in Tokyo can hide a tofu maker, a preschool, a family home, and a corner convenience store on a single block. And this is not an accident, a loophole, or a sign of weak enforcement. It is the design. Think about what that means for daily life. Where other Asian cities and American cities separate uses into rigid boxes connected by highways, Tokyo lets them mix at the neighborhood scale. Most residents can walk to shops, schools, restaurants, and daily services because those things are not zoned into a commercial district 3 miles away. They are right there, woven into the residential fabric, often on the ground floor of the same building where someone lives upstairs. A grandmother buys tofu from the shop 2 doors down. A salaryman grabs an onigiri from the convenience store at the end of his block. A child walks 3 minutes to a preschool nestled between houses. The mixed use is what makes the low-rise pattern work. You do not need 40-story towers to achieve functional density when every block contains a dozen different activities stacked into 2- and 3-story buildings. This zoning code is the quiet engine behind the Tokyo paradox. Low-rise and livable, dense and walkable, enormous and intimate, all at once. But what does this actually look like when you zoom out to the scale of an entire megacity? A megacity with no downtown. Shanghai has the Bund and Pudong. Singapore has Marina Bay. Seoul has Gangnam. One dominant central business district where the skyscrapers, the corporate headquarters, and the prestige cluster into a single gleaming core. That is the standard model for Asian megacities, and Tokyo never built it. Instead, Tokyo evolved a constellation of competing mini-city hubs. Shinjuku, Shibuya, Ikebukuro, Ginza, Akihabara, each one anchored by a massive rail terminal, each with its own cluster of skyscrapers, its own shopping districts, and its own distinct subculture. Shinjuku handles more than 3.5 million passengers a day, the busiest station on the planet, and yet it is not the center of Tokyo. It is one center among many. You move from node to node by train, not by car across a highway. The pattern resembles Paris's arrondissements more than the standard Asian model of a single CBD ringed by dormitory suburbs. Economic activity spreads across dozens of stations, supporting radically diverse subcultures, from high fashion in Ginza to anime fandom in Akihabara to artisan workshops in Shimokitazawa, rather than concentrating everything into one core. This polycentric structure is why Tokyo can feel simultaneously massive and intimate. You are never far from a neighborhood center, even in the world's largest metro. The city does not radiate outward from one point. It pulses from many. But Tokyo almost went in a completely different direction. And if one plan had succeeded, the city you just heard described would not exist. The grand vision that failed. In 1960, the legendary architect Kenzo Tanji proposed what he called a plan for Tokyo, a radical linear megastructure that would stretch across Tokyo Bay on elevated platforms. It integrated massive highways, enormous civic buildings, reorganized urban blocks, and a new axis for the entire capital. It was precisely the kind of bold, top-down modernist vision that cities like Brasilia, Chandigarh, and later Singapore and Shanghai actually built. Clean lines, rational order, the triumph of the architect's vision over the chaos of organic growth. It was never realized. The plan required political will and financial resources that post-war Japan simply did not have. And so the old fabric survived, not because anyone chose to preserve it, but because the grand alternative could not be built. Had post-war authorities fully implemented modernist road widening and use separation plans, Tokyo might today look like a hybrid of Seoul and Shanghai. A stronger CBD hierarchy, taller residential cores, more highways cutting through neighborhoods, fewer alleys, and almost certainly higher car dependence. You would drive between districts on elevated expressways instead of riding trains between station hubs. The tofu shops and pocket shrines would have been bulldozed for parking structures decades ago. The Tokyo we know exists because a grand plan failed. The opposite city was not designed. It emerged in the absence of design. One house, one shop, one rail line at a time, layered across decades of micro-decisions that no single architect ever controlled. And that failure produced something that no planned megacity has ever achieved. Walking the maze. What Tokyo actually feels like at street level is unlike any megacity on Earth. Residential streets narrow to 3 or 4 meters wide, just enough for one car to creep past, narrow enough for children to walk to school without sidewalks. And in many neighborhoods, there are no sidewalks because the speed of life does not require them. The central wards alone contain more than 450 bridges and 900 named hills. Not numbered hills, named ones with names like Yurei-zaka, Ghost Hill, and Kurayami-zaka, Darkness Hill. People navigate by micro-topography, by shrine gates and vending machines and the particular curve of a canal, not by monuments or grid coordinates. Every neighborhood has its own geography, its own landmarks, its own internal logic. Japanese planners have a term for this, Komitsu Teiso, meaning high density, low rise. It is a building typology that should not work at this scale. 38 million people threaded through a maze of alleys, back streets, and yokocho, narrow drinking lanes lined with tiny bars that seat 4 people each. And yet it moves more efficiently, more quietly, and with less congestion than cities built around 10-lane highways. The maze is not a problem to be solved, it is the solution. But the Tokyo model has a cost, and that cost is now coming due. The price of building the opposite. From the 1950s through the 1980s, Japan's national policy pushed homeownership in rail-served suburbs. Millions of families bought houses along the private lines exactly as the system was designed to encourage. The rail companies sold land, the government backed mortgages, and an entire generation moved outward along the tracks into small wooden homes with tiny gardens. But since the late 1990s, investment in younger residents have shifted back towards central Tokyo. The inner wards are densifying and gentrifying, attracting global capital and international talent. Young professionals want walkable neighborhoods near their offices, not 2-hour rail commutes to the suburbs their parents chose. The result is a divided metropolis. Thriving, globally connected central wards ringed by aging suburbs where vacancy rates climb and services quietly decline. In some outer neighborhoods along the very rail lines that once drove Japan's post-war miracle, you can walk past rows of empty houses, Akiya, they are called, windows dark, gardens overgrown, mailboxes stuffed with uncollected flyers. Schools consolidate for lack of children. Shopping streets that once bustled with young families now serve a shrinking population of elderly residents. And there is a harder edge to this story. The low-rise wooden fabric that once made rebuilding easy now complicates disaster preparedness. Those narrow alleys that feel so charming are deeply vulnerable to fire spread during earthquakes. Entire neighborhoods of aging timber frame houses sit in seismic zones with streets too narrow for fire trucks to enter. The beauty of the maze is also its danger. Japan's population is shrinking and aging faster than any major nation. Tokyo still grows, but only by pulling people from the rest of the country. A siphon, not a source. The megacity faces a question no other city its size has ever confronted. Can an incremental bottom-up model that was built for an era of growth survive an era of decline? The answer will determine whether the Tokyo model remains the world's great urban outlier or becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when a self-organizing system runs out of momentum. The geography chose this. Tokyo did not set out to be the opposite of every other Asian megacity. There was no manifesto, no visionary decree, no grand theory. A medieval patchwork survived fire and bombs because no one could afford to replace it. Private companies built rail lines to sell real estate. A national zoning code let neighborhoods mix because post-war Japan needed housing more than it needed order. A bold modernist plan failed because the money was not there to build it. One decision layered on top of another, and the result was a megacity that breaks every rule. Low-rise in an era of towers, polycentric in an era of central business districts, rail-first in an era of highways, mixed use in an era of segregation. Stand in a Tokyo back alley at dusk. Two-story wooden houses on either side, their eaves almost touching. A vending machine glowing softly at the corner. A shrine gate wedged between a laundromat and a bicycle repair shop. Somewhere nearby, a train hums past on elevated tracks, carrying 250,000 people home. 38 million people live here, and it is quiet. That is not what a megacity is supposed to be, but it is what happens when a city designs itself.